Hi everyone, this is Cammie Peterson with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. Welcome and thank you for attending our webinar, Planning for Net Zero. And we're calling it a sneak preview, which I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. But we're going to get started here today, and I'll walk you guys first through an outline of what we're going to cover in today's webinar. And I also want to just let you know that we are recording the webinar today. So our intent is to be able to share then the full recording with you all. And so you'll have the slides, you'll have the recording. You'll see there's a link or two that I've hyperlinked that you'll be able to access then through the slides when we send that out. So you should hopefully be able to have all the materials that we're walking through in terms of the slides and the audio after in a follow-up email from us following today's webinar. So let's get started. Here we are to the outline that we're going to cover today. So I'll give just a brief introduction to who we are at MAPC. I know we probably have a good number of participants online that are familiar with us, but we might have some that are not. So I'll spend just a little time providing that foundational context. Well, I'll introduce you to Mayra Cruz. And she's really the main reason that we're here today. So as I mentioned that this was a sneak preview, we're in the process of putting together a number of resources for net zero planning for our cities and towns. But we got the biggest boost in that work this summer when we hosted Mayra, who's an environmental fellow through the Environmental Fellows Program. We called her our Net Zero Fellow because of the time that she spent really digging into net zero planning, researching and reading and talking to folks about the net zero work that they've done in cities and towns, not just here in Massachusetts, around the country, and with organizations and nonprofits and advocacy groups and many others who have spent a lot of time on this. So all learned quite a bit this summer, and Mayra was really at the lead and spending a lot of time in doing that, and we're really privileged to have her here and wanted to give her a chance to share her work, her findings, and be introduced to all of you. That's one of our main purposes today, and I'm really happy to have the opportunity to do that. She'll walk you through then the context for planning for net zero, holistic planning and co-benefits, which is one of the main framings we want to bring to this work, a quick outline of where we see the process, and some case study highlights will be peppered throughout as well. I did want to give a little background on who we are. So we are MAPC, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. We're a regional planning agency here in the greater Boston area of Massachusetts. You can see that we roughly follow the 495 corridor around Boston. There are 101 cities and towns, as I mentioned, but we split that for our own organizational purposes into these subregions. You can see the funding that they have here. It is not a large area compared to the rest of the state, about 1,440 square miles, but it serves within that area 3.2 million residents, which is nearly half of the state's population, and 1.8 million jobs as well. MAPC is a mission-driven public agency. We were created by the legislature a little over 50 years ago, and we are driven by our vision for 2030, which we call Metro Future. There are a number of goals and initiatives and visions that are really covered in that Metro Future plan, and we are also just, on a side note, kicking off what will be an update to that plan in the coming months. So those in the area, look out for more information on that. But it's been the driving force and the lens for all of our work for many years, and really covers a lot of the little blurbs that you see here today, really looking to make sure that all who live and work in the Boston region fairly share the costs and benefits of the region's development, that it's a world-class region that's connected and vibrant, affordable and convenient, safe and healthy and welcoming, and that we are all responsible stewards of our environment and our resources, that we follow a socially sustainable path. And that covers things not just in transportation and conservation of land and public health and equity, but also in clean energy and climate, which is where I'm speaking to you from today. As the director of the Clean Energy Department, I'm lucky to get to work with a fantastic staff on a number of different plans and projects and programs here for the MAPC region and sometimes beyond as well. We really see our work in three buckets. That's one of the easiest ways that we have of talking about the many different things that we do and the many hats that we wear. We do work regionally, and for those of you locally here in cities and towns, we may have worked with you on one of these initiatives where we're helping bring renewable energy to your electricity supply through community electricity aggregation, also known as aggregation or community choice aggregation or green municipal aggregation, which is a moniker that we use quite often. We might have worked with you to procure a ESCO company or retrofit your streetlights, might be working with you now to bring alternative fuel vehicles to your fleets in your cities and towns. On resiliency, we bring technical assistance to our communities. Through grant writing, we help many, and might be working with some of you now, in becoming a green community through the Department of Energy Resources program, or following up to get competitive grants or do your annual reporting through that, into multiple other state and regional and federal grant and incentive programs, working on permitting and zoning and policy. Things that I can't and don't have time to go into today. But we also worked for years on climate and energy planning. It's one of our bread and butter staple programs, the core of the work that we do. We've done low energy action planning for years. We helped set up energy use baselines for municipal facilities, for community-wide facilities, strategize how to reduce that, how one compares to the cities and towns around it, climate baselining, greenhouse gas inventories, and strategizing around that. And now really taking to evolve both of those programs, create an even greater nexus between them, and release it under this new umbrella of net zero planning, recognizing the work that a lot of cities and towns in our region and around the world have started to do in this, and the real need for it at this time to set very ambitious climate and clean energy goals and find ways, no matter where you're at as a city or town, in taking those steps that you need to get there. And that's what we're going to be talking more about today. So with that, let me turn it over to our former fellow. Unfortunately, now her time here has ended. She was with us at the beginning of June through the end of August. Mayra Cruz came to us from Columbia, the School of Public Health there, where she got her MPH. And then, like I said, worked with the Environmental Fellows Program with the University of Michigan. So I'll hand it over to you now, Mayra, to tell everybody a little bit more about yourself and then about the work that you've done.
Great. Thank you, Cam, for that really sweet introduction. So I was at MAPC there for the summer, and really because of this educational background that I have in environmental health science and really having this passion for connecting public health and climate change, I decided to apply to the Environmental Fellows Program, and that was a great decision because it really allowed me to learn a lot more about clean energy. That's something that I was super familiar with coming into this opportunity, and also hadn't had much experience with urban planning. So it was a way for me to not only learn, but to also get to apply a lot of my public health background to this position. And the Environmental Fellows Program, I would highly recommend to anyone that's out there. It's one that serves to bring underserved graduate students into the environmental realm, and also is a great opportunity to learn more about environmental philanthropy. And so I'm excited to be here and to get to share everything I learned with everyone. Now, really, I just want to provide the context why we're talking about net zero and why it's so important. And this is very pertinent now, considering all these hurricanes that are going on right now with Hurricane Harvey, and people still recovering from it, and now Hurricane Irma is still making its way through Florida and South Carolina. But for now, I want to focus on the Northeast region. So through the Cloudy Boston report, I was able to gather some pertinent information. And really the key takeaways from this is that there's a very dangerous combination of sea level rise, storms, and extreme precipitation taking place in the Northeast region. As you can see, for sea level rise, there's expected 8-inch rise by 2030, 1.5 feet by 2050, and 3 feet by 2070. And these predictions are based off of an emissions area where they remain the same around through 2050 and are slowly reduced in the second half of the century. Well, in terms of extreme precipitation, we've already seen a 70% increase in precipitation from 1958 to 2010. In terms of storms right now, there's a lot of uncertainty around them. But really what this shows is that, there's a great potential here to have devastating flooding taking place in the region, as well as storm surge, and really just potential for loss of life and destruction and great economic loss if we don't act now. And then on top of that, we're also seeing extreme temperatures take rise, Obviously, they've already risen by almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit, and the increase in the average temperatures are already accelerating. So it really just shows that we're already feeling the impacts now, which is why it's important to consider aggressive climate action plan and doing something about it as soon as we can. And it's important to talk about the Paris Climate Accord that took place in 2015. This is a momentous occasion because, of course, both developed and developing nations came together to sign the Paris Climate Agreement. As of now, I believe 160 parties have ratified the agreement to limit warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius and ideally 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this was a great momentous occasion because so many countries came together to sign this. Unfortunately, this summer, President Trump decided to pull out the U.S. out of the agreement. And so this did lead to us no longer being considered a leader in terms of global climate action. But the silver lining has really been the low action that has arisen due to this action. So here, it's really important to note that a lot of momentum around climate and planning. So some of the results from this in that a Climate Mayors Compact has come together. 369 climate mayors representing 67.5 million Americans have now committed to uphold the Paris goals, which is a great accomplishment and something that shows that may really get that we need to do something about climate change now. Well, it's really important to note how much work the MAPC region has done this. You can see that Somerville has pledged to support the Paris Accord, Boston as well, the Metro Mayors Coalition, which Cami will talk about in a minute. And the MAPC region gets it. They agree that we need to continue to uphold the Paris Agreement and to really take initiatives around this. And next, I really want to highlight the fact that it's not only in the MAPC region, but also throughout the country that cities and towns have decided to approach aggressive climate action plan goals. And so here you can see that you have cities like Santa Barbara, California, which is likely to be expected, but also even Abita Springs in Louisiana, or in Florida, even Madison, Wisconsin, and then of course Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Lexington as well. And what this really shows is that cities in different parts of the country with different resources and political landscapes are coming together and making these really ambitious commitments that are needed in order to reach that agreed upon goal by the Paris Climate Agreement. And so with all that context, this brings us to what we're talking about net zero and how that can really be a tool to reach this goal. So what does it actually mean? So there's a lot of definitions that are out there that are used by very different groups and different communities. You have zero energy building, which is what the Department of Energy typically considers when looking at net zero. There's mass power forward that looks at it through a municipality lens. Change net zero task force looks at net zero through a community of buildings. So have more commonly used terms such as 100% renewable and even carbon neutral. Net zero refers to emissions related to greenhouse gases and can refer to different vectors as shown by these terms, such as energy or just looking at emissions level. And so while at first glance the definitions may look pretty different, they all really just aim to reduce emissions and contribute to the overall goal of not surpassing 2 degrees Celsius of warming worldwide. And the best way to think about this is just that these are different roads and pathways you can get to that one common goal that we all have. And so these are not competing interests at all, but really they complement each other, and it shows that there's different solutions that are out there to become net zero. And really the scope of goals that a community sets out will really be dependent on what resources they have available and can be dependent on what the largest source of emissions may be for that city or town. And so that's really what we want to emphasize here. here is a very small sampling of commitments that are featured in the work that will be published at some point soon, hopefully. And so you can see at a first glance that these commitments, as well as I was mentioning before, the different terms that are out there. So you have Seattle, Washington, who aims to be carbon neutral by 2050. Then you have some aspirational goals set out too, like Lancaster, California, which aims to be the first net-zero city by 2020. Vancouver, Canada, which aims to be the greenest city by 2020. And then you also have regional-wide commitments like the Metro Mayors Coalition, which aims to be net zero carbon free region by 2050. And then you have more traditional goals like 80% reduction of emissions by 2050. And so really I want to emphasize here is that commitments can change and can become more aspirational and more aggressive depending on changes in resources and goals and what makes the most sense for a city. I want to emphasize that it's important to get started now and to set a commitment now, and maybe it's not as ambitious as the city town may want it to be, but that can definitely change. And for a lot of these cities, they have changed over time. A lot of them started off with a goal of 8% by 2050 and have become more ambitious over time.
And I'll jump in here too, and just to that point, it's exactly right. You'll see that Boston seems to have almost, competing or, differing things there with the 80% by 2050 and carbon-free by 2050. And, their climate action plan in its most recent iteration had institutionalized that 80% by 2050 goal, which is consistent with the state of Massachusetts as well, and what you'll see in many cases and see here on the screen in many cases. But Boston, as many others, are realizing that they're probably going to be evolving that to more of a carbon-free or net zero, however it's termed, by 2050. And Boston is currently in the process now, this Green Ribbon Commission and other stakeholders, to design what that plan would be to become carbon-free by 2050. So just an example of how the definitions and the targets, the goals can really evolve and become more progressive going forward. But it is important to really institutionalize what can be the most aspirational or ambitious goal when you start, so you can get going down that path. Just continue here because we were talking about Metro Mayors Coalition and cities here in the MAPC region. I wanted to take a second just to highlight the Metro Mayors group. So it's 14 cities and towns that are here in the inner core of our Boston region, really the inner hub of Metro Boston. You'll see that they are more or less connected by the MBTA. And this is a group that the mayors and managers and their staff have come together over many years, facilitated by MAPC, to work on a number of different issues around transportation and economic development and so forth. But came together a couple of years ago, really 2014, 2015, declaring that one of their priorities was going to be climate, and really focusing on how climate change and the need for climate preparedness is an intermunicipal issue, that it's not something that's going to stop at municipal boundaries, and there was a need to work together regionally to do this work. And so at that point in 2015, a climate preparedness commitment, which also recognized the need to work on climate mitigation hand in hand with that. Many of the communities had already been working on that. For example, that climate action plan that Boston has had in place. There weren't as many institutionalized work going forward on climate preparedness, and so this allows the region to look at assets and vulnerabilities and start building that capacity together, which we've been really excited to be a part of. Last November 2016, inspired by that Conference of the Parties in 2015 that signed the Paris Agreement, the managers also signed a specific climate mitigation commitment in which they committed, as Mayra mentioned, to becoming a net zero carbon-free region by 2050. And it's one of the first regions that we're aware of in the world that's taken this kind of step. So really exciting. Well, that's the next slide here to show the commitment itself. This is the first pivot, and how by 2020 they've committed to each taking at least 3 additional climate mitigation actions, and there's a menu that is part of this commitment that you can look at on our website of what they'll take those more near-term actions, and then, like I said, this aspirational goal that we will work toward as a region to reach that important net zero carbon-free status. An example of a region right here near Metro Boston that includes a relatively large population, 1.4 million residents in those 14 municipalities that will be working toward this very important goal. Back to you, Mayra.
Thanks for that. So as Kevin mentioned, we really want to provide a framework for realistic climate planning. So a net zero plan can provide an overarching framework that serves to harmonize and grow all of the sustainability efforts that are already underway in the community and those that are forthcoming. And really want to emphasize the co-benefits that can arise from a holistic climate plan through a net zero lens. You can have benefits in the energy sector, the economic sector in terms of the environment, can improve public health and really expand equity in a city or town region. So really, this emphasis on co-benefits can make a case for net zero. The reasons for adopting a net zero goal may vary depending on a community's resources and priorities, and these co-benefits can be stacked together to present the case for establishing net zero strategies in a municipality. A case for net zero should really encompass the most convincing and appropriate arguments for the audience. So depending on who you're talking to, you may want to focus on the economic benefits as opposed to the environmental. So just keep that in mind moving forward. So first, highlight the benefits to the energy sector. And so really these revolve around energy providing more stability in pricing, for example. It can lead to a more resilient energy system that can more readily withstand the next superstorm standing, which as we're seeing now, that's very important to have resilient grid systems and to hopefully avoid power outages. To investments in local energy production and can really bolster a local economy. And so for this, we'd like to highlight Cambridge, Massachusetts. Currently, Cambridge is looking to employ a district energy system for Kendall Square, so they're doing research into that now. They're also pursuing a solar-ready rooftop requirement and trying to figure out what the best way to do that would be. Also seeking a memorandum of understanding with Eversource, which is their energy provider. They want to encourage data sharing with Eversource to invest in incentive programs to pursue smart grid pilot projects and to also increase the resiliency of their energy system. As well with via the district energy provider and operator for Kendall Station, combined heat and power plan, they would like to collaborate with Veolia around a community greenhouse gas inventory and hopefully use that example for other communities to use moving forward towards seeking a community greenhouse gas inventory. Economic benefits, there are plenty. A net zero plan can really lead to economic development. The core 2017 report by the Environmental Defense Fund, they found that the clean energy sector thus far has created 4 million jobs. As well, a 2016 Massachusetts Clean Energy Industry report found a total of 105,212 workers have been added to the clean energy economy, and they found that this was a 6% increase in comparison to the state's 2% overall employment growth rate. So this shows that it can bolster the economy, but also do it in a green manner and create green local jobs, which is crucial. For this, we'd like to highlight Georgetown, Texas, which is a very unique highlight to have. Georgetown is a Republican city in a very Republican state, led by a Republican mayor. When you hear Republican, you might think, a 100% renewable city, but that's what they became in 2017, just a few months ago. I found that they didn't decide to go 100% renewable because of environmental climate reasons. Really just came down to the bottom line of wanting to reduce costs for their consumers. For them, they have a elderly population that's on limited income resources, and so they really wanted to make sure that they had stable pricing for them. So by switching to 100% renewable, they were able to ensure reliable supply and pricing. And so this just goes to show that, while they want to pursue a net zero strategy because of environmental or climate reasons, that sometimes the bottom line may just be minded that can sometimes be reason enough to make the switch. Potential benefits can be thought about in the short term and the long term. In terms of short term, it's referring to reducing common pollutants that are very harmful to the environment. So examples are nitrous oxides, which can lead to the formation of ozone, and especially can affect sensitive vegetation and ecosystems such as forests, parks, wilderness areas, and this can lead to a loss of species diversity and can change the water nutrient cycles, which can make some impacts throughout not only the ecosystems but to impacts to the human population as well and to animals. An example of a harmful pollutant is sulfur oxides, and at concentrations can harm trees. They can harm plants by damaging their foliage and decreasing their growth. Can also lead to the production of acid rain, which can harm sort of ecosystems and can lead to the creation of haze and reduced visibility. And these are just two of many harmful pollutants that can be used if we seek another strategy and plan. As well, this can lead to the reduction of use of water, and this is because when you have processes that use fossil fuels for energy production, they usually use large amounts of water, like if you think about fracking, to get natural gas. And a lot of the times the water can be contaminated during the process through the production or because spills take place. And so if we're using clean energy, we can reduce use of water, but also keep it clean, which is important as well. Not only the environment, but also for the health of people and animals. So in terms of long term, we're really talking about the climate change impacts that we talked about already. So meeting those changes and hopefully slowing down the impacts of climate change. This is to highlight Vancouver, Canada. So Vancouver has the goal of becoming the greenest city by 2020, and along with that, they have set a goal to breathe the clean air of any major city in the world. And so the way they're going about this is to develop infrastructure to support increased use of electric vehicles throughout Vancouver. They're also labeling gas pumps for the greenhouse gases and air quality impacts to increase awareness among the public. And also in terms of air quality stations, they're improving the accessibility of air quality data and the location of their stations, and aim to inform the public about air quality, issue advisories, track progress, and develop air quality improvement policies through these incentives. So into public health, by pursuing a zero plan and goal, there can be a reduction in the exacerbation in cases of respiratory diseases such as asthma, obstructive pulmonary disease, lung cancer, bronchitis, and many more. They found that 57,000 deaths can be avoided by 2100 due to improved air quality measures. A study at Harvard University also found that energy efficiency measures and low carbon energy sources can save a range between $5.7 million and $210 million annually when accounting for public health benefits. And so also when you think about different initiatives such as complete streets and transportation initiatives that lead to that using energy sources, this can be more cleaner, but also to active lifestyles if you're promoting biking and walking to the population. So not only does that improve their health, but also we have clean air, which is great, and another co-benefit that we're getting from this. And also can lead to a saving in health-related costs, and that money then can be used for our initiatives. And so for this, we'd like to highlight Lancaster, California, which, as I mentioned before, has the goal of becoming the first net zero city by 2020. And so in their climate action plan, over 8 different sectors were identified in which measures will improve public health, among other indicators that they were looking at. And for many of these measures, they found that in the transportation sector really had a lot of co-benefits, such as increasing use of electric shuttle buses, improving pedestrian amenities, and also the increased use of bike and car sharing. And concurrently, many of these initiatives reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve air quality, long-term cost savings, energy use, and improve public health. Rates of really promoting these co-benefits that arise from clean energy and a net zero goal. So equity should really be included in this entire process. It's a way that can level the playing field for everyone, especially for low income and environmental justice communities that are historically underserved and also impacted by climate change and by environmental problems that may arise due to fossil fuel use. So stable energy prices and lower pricing benefit these communities. There can also be an increased access to living wage opportunities. In 2016, the MAPC Clean Energy Center reported a 17% increase in the hiring of workers who have earned associate degrees or high school diplomas. As on that, 70% of clean energy workers earn more than $50,000 above which is the state's overall median wage. And it's important to include underserved populations throughout the entire process and to ensure that their voice is heard. As I mentioned before, they're historically not represented, and so by including them throughout the process, they can not only give their opinions, but also hopefully reap the benefits from this more just and clean energy transition that is taking place in a city or town. This is an interesting and great highlight for this. So yes, New York City is very large, but they are undertaking measures to have fair and equal access throughout the city. So as you can see on the slide, they have a number of plans in place that focus not only on education, but also Vision Zero, which focuses on safe streets. And also after Hurricane Sandy happened, they really had a focus on building better and stronger after the hurricane. And so all of this has kind of culminated into the New York, the plan for a strong and just city that focuses on this idea of equitable access for everyone. And this by investing in overlooked areas that typically haven't had investments take place in these communities sometimes. And they're also aiming to improve air quality in these more historical EJ communities or environmental justice communities. Are doing this by having zero waste plans in place for vulnerable communities. So they're reducing truck trips that take place in these communities and diverting these truck routes so that not only do they have improved air quality, but also have an improvement in their health. I want to talk about more of the process of how you would go about putting together a net zero plan and goal. So as you can see, there aren't any numbers enumerated here to go along with the process. We really wanted to emphasize that this linear process, that it will likely continue to be cyclical and will require a whole systems approach. But if you were starting, from scratch in the beginning and didn't have really many initiatives in place that could lead to your plan or goal, then we would suggest starting from recruit support from the community and then moving on to pursuing a commitment from the city or town and gathering the necessary information to create a net zero plan and really thinking about incorporating holistic this entire process from start to end. So it's very crucial to recruit support from the community that you're in, and this can consist of creating a net zero team of sorts that comprise of municipal officials, staff, and related committees. Since the related committees, that can be, an energy committee that's already in place or a sustainability one that can be part of the team. So advocates that are already pushing for more clean energy initiatives in a city or town, there are local utilities, businesses, schools, and it's also going to keep in mind regional and state partners that may be in place, like MAPC, that can provide a great technical assistance and have a lot of programs in place, like Cami mentioned before, that would be useful throughout this entire process, and a wealth of knowledge that they can provide. And so it's also important to conduct education and outreach amongst the community. And it's important to be mindful of diverse communities that may be in place. So maybe, there's a Spanish-speaking community that you want support from, so you great to have someone who can translate in place, for example, or maybe the elderly population in a pocket of your city that you want to talk to, so maybe, not using social media to contact them would be good to consider. So just be mindful of those kinds of things. And it's just important to share this progress and disseminate to the team and stakeholders and to ensure that everyone's on the same page and that everyone has like a similar educational baseline moving forward. So next, pursuing commitment from your city or town, and so this can be done in a number of ways. Could introduce a net zero initiative at a town meeting or city council, and then move to formalize a community and a deadline for a net zero plan. So the goal is really to convince officials to allocate funding and resources. So if you live in a town, you need a town warrant article to do that, and if you were in a city, you would require a resolution. And if you were allocated funding and resources, this would be really helpful to hire staff, for example, and see a consultant to help you throughout the process. And if it's not available to you, you could consider a volunteer expert, hiring a shared energy manager, or even starting internship programs. So considering those other budget-friendly options that also may be available. To do the research before you start creating a net zero plan. And so this involves measuring a local energy use baseline and undertaking a greenhouse gas inventory. And so doing this research and having a baseline and a greenhouse gas inventory can allow a city or town to prioritize climate action planning, because by undertaking these two measures, then you have a better idea of where you're using the most energy and also where most of your emissions are coming from. So below you can see an example of Somerville's greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and you can see that they broke it down by local government and community inventory. And so there's a number of ways that you can down your emissions by. And a good idea of what the numbers are, you can then start to create a net zero plan and strategy. So this plan can help to dictate a budget and can allow a city or town to plan ahead and look at appropriate sources of funding and to provide another way to prioritize what the city or town wants to undertake depending on what resources are available. And then lastly, you can adopt and formalize a net zero goal and strategy. And so this can be done through a city resolution or a town warrant article, but if that's not possible, then even just having a public showing of this commitment can be a great way to not only hold the city accountable, but to hold everyone else accountable for this. And this idea of holistic planning is important to incorporate throughout the entire process. It's to track the municipality's progress throughout. And it's really helpful when you have a municipal staff member in place actually to do this work, to have someone assigned who can at least take this on. You want to consider what indicators you want to measure throughout the progress and publicize this progress, not only for accountability, but also there might be a city or town that is similar to you in terms of like and therefore seeing how that city or town is doing can be really helpful for that city to see. So those are ways of not sharing and building up that knowledge so that others can use it as well and learn from each other. And so it's important to also ensure that existing and future plans align and are compatible with the net zero target. This can also provide a way to leverage a net zero strategy to inform and guide other meaningful policies and plans that are already in place or that are forthcoming. And this is important to keep in mind how to create an adaptable net zero process and plan. So a great example of this is actually Cambridge, Massachusetts zero plan for their buildings. So this is just one section, not the whole entire Gantt chart that they put in place to keep track of all their goals. And so this chart allows the city to keep track of all the stages of planning that have in place and can follow internally as a work plan. As this tool demonstrates that the planning approach is laddered, as you can see by different years in place, and the different strategies that they're undertaking to reach these goals. And you can see that these they're at the 5-year review signpost. Different boxes so that they're dedicating time to research. They also have net zero targets for different sectors of their buildings. It allows for flexibility in planning if changes occur, and also allows for sustainability because we have this in place already. And so it's a great tool to consider for a holistic plan moving forward, and something that other cities and towns can aim to replicate if they're interested in this kind of method and tool. And so just the quick takeaways to take away from this presentation. So one, undertaking a holistic net zero planning approach can really make sure that there's great harmony throughout the process, and also make sure that existing plans and plans match up with this net zero planning strategy that's underway. It's important to know the audience that you're speaking to and who you're trying to get support from, because depending on who you're talking to, your may change. It's important to take stock of what the city town has already done in terms of net zero and clean energy. It's possible that the town doesn't have many initiatives underway yet, or is already a green community and has complete streets in place and a few other initiatives, or already well underway and has already done a energy use baseline, has already done a greenhouse gas inventory and has a plan in place. So just knowing where you are can be really helpful in terms of figuring out where to start and where improvements are needed. It's important, I think, regionally. It's something that I haven't seen done before, and something that is very unique to MAPC. But this would be a great way to get a number of cities and towns to work together to share their knowledge and to share their best practices, and also to help each other out if problems are throughout the process. Stakeholder engagement is really important, because not only one voice should be represented throughout this process. Many will be needed in order for this to take place, and therefore they should be at the table to have these important conversations. Creating complementary programs and plans kind of goes along with this idea of holistic net zero planning and that framework. By having complementary programs and plans, you can make sure that, if you have a plan that's based off your transportation sector and your buildings, another sector, that they all work together for this common goal of reaching a net zero, making that happen. And it's really important to integrate equity into the initiatives and plans, and should be there from the start. It should not be an afterthought. We live, in the United States, there's inequity throughout, and so net zero strategy, as shown before, can really even the playing field for everyone, and so that should be taken advantage of. And lastly, residents are a key part of this entire process. They should not be forgotten about. A lot of the end of that a city or town may to see how will affect residents, and so they should be an important key and component of this entire process. And so that I will let Cam finish up with what the next steps are for this initiative that MAPC is taking.
Thanks, Mayra. So yeah, I wanted to let you all know, first and foremost, and you might have seen this in some of our newsletters or other events, emails that have gone out recently, but we have our Clean Energy Forum coming up, and not coincidentally, it will too be focusing on our new series, the 0 to 101 series, bringing net zero to 101 cities and towns and beyond, and really taking a closer look at planning for net zero, building a lot of the resources that Mayra has spoken so articulately about today, and the resources that we're building out from those and that she spent so much time on, that we'll be releasing as the next couple of months go on, and that we'll be able to give you a much finer point on at this forum through some panels and facilitated discussions and breakout sessions at the tables that we'll be having. So the slides that we send out, that link I think will be live on them, so you'll be able to click on that, as well as in the emails that we've sent out recently. The links there are active, so you can go and register now. There is early bird pricing, I believe, through September 20th, so that will save you a little bit, and the prices are very reasonable in any case. So we hope you'll be able to join us there. We're looking forward to a lot of great speakers and to be able to share a lot of resources with you that these slides were a great sneak preview of. The big next step in this series will be our forum coming up in about a month exactly on October 11th, and we hope to see you there. There also will be more resources, as I've mentioned, that will be rolling out, that you'll hear from us soon about the web presence that will include access to those resources, as well as other events that will come as part of this series down the road. So we're excited to be rolling out more and more of this work, and again, a big thank you to Mayra for the time and dedication she brought to bear over the summer for her work on this and the ability to allow us to really ramp up our efforts in this and get this work off the ground. So we're really excited to be doing that. And I think, Mayra, you still control the slides, so if you wouldn't mind just advancing to that final one, and that will just be my thanks. Will be my, we might have popped out of it, but it's just my contact information. And so anyone that wants to follow up, since Mayra, unfortunately, her fellowship here has ended, you can do so directly with me. That's my email address and my phone number. I will say, caution anyone from looking to find out too much more on our website right at the moment. We are in the middle of a soft launch of our very highly awaited new website, and some of the kinks are still being worked out. So if you do go to our website, which is just mapc.org, and have trouble finding anything, rest assured that that should be in much more workable form very shortly. But in the meantime and whenever, please feel free to reach out directly to me or any of my staff at our email address or phone number. Thank you again to Mayra. Thank you to all of you for joining us today, and we hope to see you on October 11th. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.